Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's In Conversation between Daphne Wright, one of Ireland's leading contemporary artists, and director Barbara Dawson. Before I introduce our speakers, we've just been asked to advise you that in the event of an emergency, please follow the instructions of our staff. This conversation coincides both with Daphne Wright's solo exhibition, Deep-Rooted Things, currently on view in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, and conceived in partnership with Hugh Lane Gallery, and the recent acquisition by the Hugh Lane Gallery of Primate by Daphne Wright, a live cast of a rhesus monkey in marble dust, onyx resin, and with silk embroidered coat. Sensitively displayed in Gallery 14 on the first floor, an encounter with a small, fragile animal in pale grey and white is, as Barbara Dawson has written, both poignant and compelling. Daphne Wright is known for her unsettling yet poignant sculptural installations, which use a variety of techniques and materials, including photography, plaster, tinfoil, sound, voice, and video. She's also worked on larger-scale public projects, collaborating with artists across disciplines, architects, writers, and theatre professionals, and in her recent exhibition looks at the museum and the personal, meditating on passing time, the transience of life, and in the sculpture of her two sons, the forging of male identity. We are very grateful to the artists for being with us this evening, and please join me in extending a very warm welcome to both our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Can you all hear me? You can, great. Well, welcome, Daphne, and it's lovely to have you here this evening as we're celebrating putting on view Primate, which is one of our recent acquisitions. We're going to have a look this evening at a bit of an overview of your career. And as people will know, or many of you do know, but some may not, you were born in County Longford, and you have from very early on been very interested in the creation of things, but been very interested in the materiality of substance. So you studied sculpture, first of all, in Sligo Regional Technical School, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
With Fred
Conlon and Con Lynch,
yeah,
and quite a few other people as well. But yeah, so sculpture and ceramic sculpture, and I was there for I think 4 years maybe, and a very, in hindsight, a very luxurious thing to have. All of that, those years to explore pure sculpture and making.
And it was always sculpture that you were interested in?
Yeah, we did, of course, the foundation year where we did everything. Yeah. And then after that we specialised, and it was really clear that it was sculpture that I was drawn to, yeah.
And then you went on to NCAD?
NCAD for 2 years to do the
BA.
And then after that to Newcastle Poly for 2 years part-time MA, and a very different, the Poly had a very different programme than the university, Newcastle University, and that's quite important.
Yeah. Was it more radical, or was it just different thinking?
It was more radical, freer thinking. A lot of our lectures would have been young, at the time, young tutors who just finished in Goldsmiths and came up doing visiting tutoring. Yeah. So we had a lot of input of new ideas and challenging ideas. And
so we're going to start to look at some of the early works, because as Daphne said, sculpture has been her subject all along, but she's used very different materials. She's used soft clay, she used jesmonite and resin. She's also used tinfoil and very soft plastercal. So if we just look at one of the works, do you want to turn around a bit further, Daphne? Yeah. we're not putting your backs to it.
Yeah.
So where do broken hearts go? And these are the works from the 90s. This and the next one is They've Taken to Their Beds.
Yeah.
And I think this one, Looking for the Home of the Sickness.
Yeah.
So we just go back to just looking at these, and this is Where Do Broken Hearts Go? And first of all, I was struck by the photographs on the walls. So could you tell us a bit about this work and how this came about?
So I suppose I would have been very aware of the traditional sculptural, I suppose, laws of sculpture about weight and volume and viewing in three-dimensional ways. And I tried to challenge that. Some of it was because financially to do that, to make anything like that, was really problematic. But also the idea of weight, I found a challenge. I just always tried to disallow weight in my sculptures. And these are made out of just tin foil, starting off with coils and coils of tin foil. One, because it was something that you play with on a table, but also the possibilities that it gave for volume. And I would look at the language of tin foil as being something not true or not truthful, that it had a pretend or a lie through it, and I was very interested in that. And what I tried to set up here was a stage set, or I think of it as a cold desert, so that there's an emotional impact. And through the work, you would walk around, and then there's a narrative being told, which is sound. And I've worked with sound a lot at this time. So there's a single voice reading two different country and western songs that are just read and delivered, and with a certain amount of emotion. And then, so your narrative changes. One was a gun battle, one was about a broken heart, as you get in country and western, and then the other was one of Dolly Parton's own songs about a child murder. Yeah. And I had found these photographs that in a second-hand shop in Manchester that had been taken inside an orphanage by a nun. This is what we worked out from it. And then I pushed them back through a black and white printing process. So through the whole stage, there is an emotional, psychological feel built up, and then that narrative is moved and shifted maybe 3 times.
Yeah, toward the cold desert.
Yeah.
And then you continue with the tin foil, and They've Taken to Their Beds, which is
Story, son.
Which is an intriguing work, a kind of a beautiful work, a seductive work, and yet you have the birds hanging upside down like trussed birds there.
Yeah. So I suppose these are like, they're made again in tin foil, painted first. The tin foil's painted, and then I would build it up and make whatever I wanted out of it. And these are like the songbirds that you're not meant to shoot. And I was looking at the time at Barbara Cartland's romantic novels and the notion of escapism and delusion and withdrawal. And also they're hung, I suppose, like a carcass where the blood circulates through. But it's also, for me, it was like if you rip maybe ivy off a wall, on the other side you can see where it had pressed together. So the center of this kind of carcass or blood vessels is empty. So when you look in, you see the other side. And some of it was just like a sheer drive to make, just the joy and the thrill of making. And then you use your language of the material to build a narrative or a psychological tension in this empty sculpture that's described.
Talking about Daphne's work, it comes out, she born in Longford, studied in Sligo, then Dublin, and then studied in Newcastle, and then lived and worked in Bristol. And so we certainly, in her work, I would say that history, time, inheritance and memory are all brought together in forging identity. And also in her work you have certain sort of fragile, vulnerable and mutable subject matter. And in the next work you have here, Looking for the Home of the Sickness, which is this wonderful plaster work with these extraordinary balustrades linking them here. And Looking for the Home of the Sickness remind me of sort of like homesickness.
Yes. Was in Cheltenham at this stage doing a Cheltenham Fellowship, and it was sitting on a train and you look out at all the landscape was continuously going by like this, two-dimensionally flattened, but also I had been looking at the idea of nostalgia and home. And again, I would suspend sculpture. I never allowed it to sit on the ground. It was always vacant or empty or deceptive. So the scene is like two huge theatrical curtains that I've modelled in clay. They're rhododendrons with all the connotations that rhododendrons in the landscape have, and then divided up by balustrades and miniature trees, so there's a strange perspective. And a lot of it was this idea of the landscape being carved up by parkland and what that does to parkland, the introduction of rhododendrons. So there was a lot of very subtle politics in the work that I don't overtly talk about, particularly at this time, because it was a very political time in the UK.
And so was this a time of working identity also with you?
Yeah, and I had been particularly references in plaster and plaster work that was a particular time within Irish history, and in UK history as well.
Yeah, there's kind of the Georgian balustrades going across there.
And so it's taking a blanket language of Georgian architecture and studio, and then forming it into my own language.
Yeah, which continues on. And then, this was almost like a still life greenhouse. Again, it's working in this. This is all in the 90s. Of working with this soft clay plaster.
I would model up the clay sheets of like net curtain, and then cast those. So the plaster casting was a really important part of my vocabulary at the time. Yeah. And then I made a greenhouse that once you look into, there's rows of cabbage, which are again still the old-fashioned notion of still life, but the exclusion. And some of that was like the allotments in the UK that you had to be settled in order to have an allotment. So there was a lot of questions of, a lot of reference through art history, but also trying to speak subtly about political things rather than overtly.
Rather than when you're in one country, you're probably thought of as being in the other. When you also speak about codes and codes when living within a code.
Yeah, a lot of the work at that time dealt with sense of belonging or not belonging, or where you settled. And I think the fact that sculpture, I used the medium of sculpture that then was weightless or empty, or
would it be it could be portable?
But yes, this broke down into panels. So each panel was just about the size I could manage, and then they were all screwed onto a wooden framework. Yeah.
And then, of course, we move on to a seismic change in your life with the birth of your two children in the early noughties. And these are the earliest sculptures of your
the early 20s.
Early 2005. Sorry.
2000.
So the notion of death mask freezes in time. something that's usually it's used with people, as you know, you've seen in the antique, and that, you know, if a death mask are taken of someone who's just died, and it's sort of like the body is still living and yet they're dead, and this is the last image you'll have, and they call it a death mask.
Yeah.
And it's also, and you refer to these as death masks as well, in the sense that they, it's time, it's lost, you know, this time is over, it's the death of this time.
Yeah.
And this is it was a move, because would you just talk a little bit about moving into this material and the sculptures of the souls?
Yeah. So once I had children, that time, endless time in the studio where you're pressing and pressing material through, rendering it with your own hands, making, just was totally taken away. And there is a certain shock in that. And it meant that, well, also, once I had my children, I lost the ability to touch material, which I would have had. I just had a kind of a physical revulsion to material, to the point where it would have made me vomit. And I think that's some kind of thing in yourself, that you're protecting your time. You need all this time. And so my whole method of making changed, and I did begin the casts, and the animal casts, the casts of the death of the animal, and also the cast of death of time. And some of that was, I think, the mold has its language is that of loss. When you make a mold, it is it's longing for where it came from, and that longing within that mold making process it's within the language. So you know that intuitively as a person looking at it. So I would be very tuned in to that kind of speech from material.
Yeah.
And that longing for the mold, for its positive, is what you work with. And so I would go to people's houses, other parents' houses, and they would have little hands, little prints of children's hands pressed, or little footprints. So I began to get really interested in that, and it felt to me like all these parents were grieving, even though we're all in the middle of things moving on and alive, but there was a grief for the passing of the moment. And I just became desperate to capture that in the children before they moved on. And as soon as you cast, it's already gone.
And I mean, it looks as if, you know, it wasn't exactly easy for them either.
No. Well, we did it in pieces. We did it in pieces, and they would have been involved in it, in that they cast little bits of themselves, and you know, it was made a really well. I was always making stuff with them, and they were always making stuff on the kitchen table. So actually, casting little bits of them was also was in the nature of it. It wasn't anything peculiar.
And were they conscious of that they were, you know, it was a death, a sort of a death of time? No, wouldn't have talked about that. We'd have talked about it capturing the volume of their As you see, their eyes
body.
are closed, you know, it's just very... And then what was the thinking? And so we're moving on then, kitchen table, which was the next
maybe
speaker.
around the same time.
Yeah. So what was the thinking and the process around this?
I think it's like taking, almost like the still life greenhouse, that you literally freeze a whole moment. You're not just freezing a hand or a foot. You're freezing the entire moment, and the entire domestic scene then becomes a monumental record of passing of time, or a monumental longing for that point that's gone.
Yeah, and the negotiation with them, again, there's a certain in a way, there's a certain agreement entered into, but there's also a certain sort of dominance, of parental dominance, that this is going to happen, isn't it, in this work?
Yeah.
And it's a time when the kitchen table is where everything happens. It's the area where...
And it's a very communal thing for all of us. It's a shared space, and they're happy to be within that space. It's where learning and play, everything, food, everything takes place.
Yeah. Again, you see, there's also a certain vulnerability, I think, in the work, but there's also a certain kind of, not a brutality, but the artist was going to make this work. and that, you know, there's that wonderful mixture of the vulnerable and the fleeting of time, and then the permanence of the work itself.
Yeah.
Which does allows you the mould to take on its own life and the mould to remain as they slip away into...
Yeah, the mould has captured the volume, and I often think of it as the way Pompeii, when they found these things that they could pour. Yeah. However, these are hollow, so they're hollow. So it's a different kind of language. Yeah. So you're always only capturing. You're always late. The moment you've caught, it's already gone. So it's moved on.
And the next one we'll see is this amazing new work, Suns and Couches, which was is the central piece in the Ashmolean exhibition, Deep Rooted Things, which is currently on, and it's on until next February. So again, can we talk through the process of this, and we will go back to some works that were made in between times, but I think it's very interesting to look at these masks and the process of sculpting, the process of casting, because it is something that's very much part of your practice. Now these boys have grown up completely, so it's a different negotiation now.
Yes. Well, the kitchen table were child into adolescence, and this is adolescent into manhood or adulthood. Yeah. And I would have liked to have captured this work earlier, but the negotiations were very different, and we had a lot of discussion, which for me is a huge part of the work. A huge part of my work is the inquiry and the discussion, and then you end up with maybe the piece, but there's all this ghost scaffolding of thought process and trial and error, and a lot of pieces that don't work before it actually reaches to the point it does. But the scene has changed from the table to the couch, which was really clear that the table doesn't work for young teenagers anymore, that it is this own reckless space that is theirs, which is the couch, and that's their domain. So a lot of things had shifted, and the choice of where everybody sat or what they did was choice.
Territorial.
Yes, yes. So all of that is within that, and within having to negotiate anyway as our timeline, which is the children have grown into adults.
Yeah, and it's completely different. And talk to us about the whole process or the thinking behind this. This is cast as well.
Yes,
all of this is cast.
Yes.
So everything in it here is cast. And when you see it in real life, the delicate kind of veins of colour that go through the rug and the cloth on the back of that are truly, they're so sensitively done, and yet you have these big boys. There's something very interesting about the feet, you know, the detail in this, and you'll see that in Primate too when you see it. There's certain, and so also with this you have one of Daphne's motifs, which is the flowers, the vase of flowers, which are always usually in some sort of sense of decay. Yeah. So in this, there is, of course, decay as well, isn't there? Like this is, once you've cast this.
Yeah. Well, a lot of still lives, the genre of still life is that a lot of the things are painted within them have secret meanings or codes. And I would be very aware of that through the history of art. And I suppose with this, you know, how you handle different things and where you place them have a quiet message. But we do that in our house, in our domestic scenes. We set up our sitting rooms almost like theatre sets, or the kitchen table, or we design.
So could you decode this a bit? So we have, and also this is, facing this, now we don't have that slide, facing this is the fridge. And the fridge, of course, it's the fridge with no door on it. And in the fridge is a chicken that's never going to be cooked, some asparagus that's never going to be eaten in a bowl. But talk to us a little bit about that kind of the relationship about when you're bringing up, when you have children, the sense of life and death, particularly in the beginning, and then the sense of nourishment, and then moving on. I mean, it's devastating, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And I think the first pieces of the still of the boys in the very beginning, it's I think certainly it's the overwhelming thing that you're having to keep somebody alive, and the very thin, very, very thin curtain between life and death, and people are passing out and of your life in death, and then people are entering in, young babies entering in. So it's like this really close line. I think sometimes in your life you're very, very alive to that, how thin that is, and how the responsibility of maintaining a life or keeping somebody alive. And you may be keeping somebody alive, but you may also be hurting somebody, helping somebody out of life. And I think for a lot of our family generations, that's how it is for people in the middle of that timeline.
And because you grew up on the farm, and you during this time when the babies were born, the notion of the dead animals, or which are part of the natural husbandry of a farm, brought you into what was your thinking around your? We just use sons and couch there. It's a wonderful feat.
And the piece has moved on since this. This was in the studio in progress. We still haven't got the full ones of it in the museum, because there's more pieces in there.
Yeah,
yeah. And it's painted more as well.
And there they are again. I mean, they have agreed, but there's certainly it's a certain sort of distance, isn't there?
Yeah. And also the carpet is a cast, so it is the cast of our couch. And I had to negotiate really hard to get the couch as well, but it's come back
territory now. Yeah.
Yes. And then the carpet is also a cast of the carpet that then I erased all the detail out of, because a lot of the work had a high detail because of the casting process. And then the design, I drew the motif back in afterwards. So there's a strange latency in the time, or how you receive the image.
Yeah. In the catalogue, Zaz Sturgis, the director of the Ashmolean, and myself were interviewing Daphne way back last year, and I was talking to her about, motherhood has certainly, she's spoken about it very eloquently this evening, and I was saying to her, sculpting, women's sculptures don't appear very much in the work. Of course, they do appear in her films, because Daphne also has quite a considerable body of film work. But I was particularly struck by this sculpture, and indeed this installation, which I think is it deserves to be unpicked quite a bit. But first of all, look at the formal sculpture of the female figure here, and which is certainly very particular to what you were thinking there.
Yes, yeah. I guess that with this body of work, this was the body of work I started making myself. with my own hands again once I could make. That the material that I started back with was clay, and I think that's really understandable, and a lot of artists do that because it's immediate, and you can, if you're skilled, you can render anything you want in it cheaply. And that was quite a thing as well.
So the material of clay, it just helped you ease back into the creative process?
Yeah, most of the other material, as I was saying, I just had a revulsion to, but somehow something about it worked. And then I just left it. I couldn't bear to add anything to it in the beginning, so it just stayed unfired, and this is all unfired. And then I found a way of supporting it and repairing it and reinforcing it. And I think that was all part of the process of being a carer at that time that you do. You have something incredibly fragile, and then you have to repair it and strengthen it. And I think that process, I think sometimes materials you're drawn to and how you technically work has reference to how you're living at that point, or what your repetitive movements might be.
And layers of it, and you have to be very, very strong and times dominant, and then there's a huge vulnerability as well.
Yeah.
So this figure of the female, I remember you saying to me you were tired of how the female figure was rendered or was created.
I suppose I began to look at within sculpture how the female figure was rendered by mainly men sculptors. And I began to try to take over the body, the female body, for myself. This took me, I'd say, 7 years to do in the garage, because every inch I would look had been sexualized, even from the ankle to the calf, every aspect of the female body. And in the end, I went back, and this is probably where the Ashmolean Museum came in as well. The cleidatic figures were the most simplest form of the figure that I found, and I tried to work with that and that two-dimensional quality. But the figure itself is hollow, and it is made from coiling, starting off with the very basic thing of coiling a pot. So I coiled the figure, and then modelled through the coiling.
Which is it.
Yeah.
And then and also what we call on the stand there is what we call it the orb, or a kind of an oval shape like a big egg.
Yeah.
This setting here is domestic, but also it has the clothes horse here, has again another flower there, and it is a lamp. But the orb on this is reminiscent of a Barbara Hepworth work. So we're looking here at the ambition of woman, or the potential of woman, as well as a domestic potential, but it's also the potential of creative and artistic. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, I would have been very aware of Barbara Hepworth's three forms. So they're like three beautifully sculptured white marble forms. And at the time, she did speak about it being her three children. And I was really interested in that. And I have made the clay orbs, but I have never shown them. And I did do this huge one, which for me was like a covert piece that sat there as the potential of women, and the Barbara Hepworth that she didn't render of herself. And it sits in the middle of the domestic thing, powerfully silent. But it's also kind of space age as well. It's got a pulse in it.
It's kind of again, it doesn't have a huge amount of figuration on it, like the figure, the Cyclades type figure. But again, as you say, it is indicating, it's a message through it of the potential or the ambition of the woman,
of the future, and also the future within a domestic environment. And I would use ordinary domestic thing and make them extraordinary in their mundaneness.
Like the plates, or
Yes, like the aviola plant, or like the lamp, that you make them extraordinary by just being themselves. And also the way I rendered them in the making, that they could occupy the soul of their material, so that they weren't just representation or a copy, that by rendering them in your making, they speak with their own voice. And it might be a mute voice, but there's and everybody everybody knows what that is when a piece of sculpture occupies outside of itself.
Because the language of sculpture is very particular, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
And brought on by the materials that are used.
Yeah.
And you speak about the emptiness, the hollow, or the how it takes on its own identity and its own form.
Yeah.
And we are going to just look now at the casting of plaster casts of, death masks and life masks. And people for people are quite well known, as I say, for ancient. So, but tell us about animals in your work. I mean, we spoke about the life and death, motherhood, and that very precarious balance between nurturing and losing, but also with animal casting. So does this come back to where you were brought up in Longford, or a man and nature? What's the driving force?
Well, I think when I had the children, I went back to the farm a lot more. So it's like you revisit the things that you knew but you didn't know, that you've forgotten them. And I always saw that there was a line generation through the family, also with the animals on the farm. So there was a very close alignment between the farm and the family. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I was quite fascinated by that. And the grief, there would be grief for an animal passing away. Within certain boundaries. And I guess I was very interested in that at the time. And also the economic currents also affected, our economic currents affected animals. And with the horses that came into the UK to be rendered into horse meat for the Belgium and French market, there was a total influx in around 2008, the time when there was an economic recession, and beautiful animals were put down. So I would have been very aware of that, but I'm also very aware of monuments and the language of the monument, which was the marble. So this work is marble and onyx and resin mixed together, using the language of the monument. And I made a death mask from the huge stallion.
Tell us about this. How did you find your stallion, and why did you want to do the stallion? We don't have it. You had a severed head, a cow's head, which we would see as a part of man and nature, and particularly on the farm. It would be something that would have happened, or indeed calves that might be born. The natural, as I said earlier, husbandry of farming. But the stallion, so what was the journey with this?
Well, the one thing was about, the language of the monument, and the language of the usually a horse on a monument, and then also the upturning of the patriarch. And so, but the thing is, my work is never about one thing. It's always about several things at the one time that just pull off each other. And also compassion for maybe the old stallion that has died or has served well. And but yeah, so there's a lot of
vulnerability then, sort of.
Yes.
What you imagine is the really tough and strong, and the invincible is sort of then becomes the vulnerable.
So there's a certain amount of grief for that magnificent animal, and all that we as humans portray onto that animal.
Is this cast in Jesmonite?
This is first of all, the death mask was made, and then into that death mask is a layer of marble and onyx and resin. So it's hollow in the inside. So the death masks are all hollow.
And how long did it take you to do that?
Years. Years in the finding of the animal, because you had to know that there was going to be an animal, because I only intervene in a journey that animal is on, for better or worse. That's what we as humans have decided, that's how we live our lives. So I am more like a witness than, and I always think that my comment is just open, whether it's a positive or a negative. I just access what we do and represent it to ourselves. So that took us a very long time to physically work out how we could do it as well. So a lot of vets gave me information, and I work with really good caster people who I've worked with for years and years.
Hey.
And we go through it, and we have disasters, and we go through it until we get there.
Oh.
But years of doing it. Yeah.
And now we're going to come to our recent acquisition, which is Primate, which you're all going to see. But this is a very moving work, a rhesus monkey, and in her statement on this, Daphne speaks about it explores the relationship between humans, animals, and medicine. And what she was looking for was to find a scientific institution which would allow an art process, isn't it? Which would involving a rhesus monkey to be carried out within a scientific institution. And we talk about that now, because I mean it is it's an amazing sculpture here. The detail on it is created with Jesmonite and marble dust, and then it has a coat of embroidered silk.
Yeah.
Which coats it as a sculpture, as opposed to just a complete reproduction of the actual rhesus monkey. And it's also looking at life-saving medicine and looking at death.
Yeah.
So would you like to tell us a bit more about that process and that journey?
And so I think this piece is a very difficult piece to handle, and it's taken us a long time. The Hugh Lane has really been the right place to place it. And again, it took an inquiry of a very long time, but I suppose thinking first was that very close line between the slide between life and death, new life and death at the same time, and how we prolong life and how we might desire for our loved ones to have a prolonged life, and the decisions what the knock-on decisions out into the world that makes for maybe others that we don't know.
Yeah.
And I suppose I was interested in how, again, absolutely compelled to try to find where this happened and represent it.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of negotiation, because nobody would allow anybody in, let alone an art practice. So there was deep suspicion about doing it. And the only reason, after a long searching, that I found somebody was because the director thought art was important, and also ethically it was sound.
Yeah.
And
this is the Wisconsin Research Center for Scientific Research.
And also they had made huge advancements in medicine
And it was for AIDS, motor
HIV
neuron
treatment.
motor neuron, and a lot of very potentially.
But very, very, very difficult area. And I went and visited, and there was a lot of objections from their own team and the people who worked with the animals. And then eventually we got permission. But it was an incredibly difficult thing to do. And then we made a cast in lab kind of conditions. Everything was laid out. This animal's life was the result of its life. Whether you were complicit or not, the trouble is we are complicit, and it's just where those lines are drawn. And I took away the mold, the body went back to the lab, and the mold, we then cast out the death mask. And when we had it and everything, it just did not work. It just was very, very dead. And the next layer then was to go to Janet Haig, who is a British embroiderer who is really excellently skilled, and negotiate with her to how we could make a pelt, and not just a two-dimensional cover, but a three-dimensional sculpture out of embroidery. And so we devised methods to do that. And even then, we got it back, and it still didn't function. And then I worked with John Brennan, who painted very subtly death back into the face and any parts of the body. So death almost has to be exaggerated rather than in death masks, they were nearly always painted.
Yeah.
But we'd only discovered that through the need to paint it in.
In discussing it, Daphne says the primate is our kith and kin, and our stand-in not only in medicine but also for the heart and the imagination. It is an image of the human. Everything about it might be like us. It's filled with pathos, its body, its proximity, its delicate biology, its expression. The rhesus monkey is our ancestor, our antecedent, past and passing away, an object of reverie, honour, compassion, and mourning.
Yeah.
And I think this is always an underlying theme in your work, is the delicate balance between both time passing, vulnerability, life enhancement, and also then out of that how we live and how we and how we manage our vulnerabilities and our strengths.
Yeah, and some very brutal looking and not looking away, and even when it makes for trouble.
I would always think with Daphne Wright's work that you read it and then you have to read it again and again, because I have said to her before, it can be very benign, but there's a brutality of reality. If I'm not going to try and talk about Francis Bacon, but the brutality of fact is there, even in the domestic situations, which give you that kind of jolt and frisson, which great artworks do. And thank you very much for discussing that with us this evening. We have time for some questions, if anybody would like to ask any questions. Or if you're all dying to go and see the artwork.
Can I ask you why you chose the saguaro cactus? Sorry, why did you choose the saguaro cactus? Is there a particular reason?
Oh, the big cactuses. Because they're cowboy western films and the spaghetti westerns, it's sort of like in all the comics, they were just drawn like that with their arms up like that. So I took, I suppose, the notion of the spaghetti western and reproduced it. Yeah.
Used to grow one farm, so
Wow, I didn't know that.
they're actually a protected character.
Wow. Wow. Well, some of them, when they were made, they didn't work, and I went up and sawed the arm off. This is quite
The brutality coming.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm just curious how the Hugh Lane Gallery got together with the Ashmolean, with obviously your agreement to have this exhibition. I'm also in Oxford. I'm also a little bit curious about the exhibition, which I do intend to go to see. So if you possibly could say a few words on that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, the Ashmolean and the Hugh Lane, for me, were a really good fit, because the Ashmolean has this world collection, ancient
Antiquities. And,
yeah, very diverse collection. And then, for me, the Hugh Lane had a contemporary ambition for, well, I don't know if I'm going to be picked up on this, but my notion of the Hugh Lane was aspirational, a collection for Ireland at a very particular time when I suppose the Ashmolean would have been collecting in a particular way. And for better or worse, that's the tension between the two institutions, and some of the reasoning, and also the idea of youth and young teenagers taking on both these museums for the future, with all the dialogue and controversy that we have about appropriation, collection, ethics, all of those questions. And then you put two young adults with the pathos and the anxiety that you have as a mother or a parent for your young adults into that arena and that dialogue. So it's a lot. The lines of inquiry are quite deep and they're not explicit. They just you quietly come on them yourself.
If I could add to that, you always talk about the language of museums.
Yes.
Very much, Daphne, it works very well in the language of museums. So it insinuates into that language a certain other type of domesticity, but you also recognise a certain domesticity even in the greater artefacts that are there. And in this collection here, you were also fascinated by Hugh Lane's collecting of the women who had just qualified from Slade, like Ursula Truitt and others.
Yeah.
And in those flower pieces, you might discuss a little bit about those flower pieces for us.
Well, I see the flower pieces that Barbara mentions from the collection as these quiet, radical works that are so easily overlooked and so easily people just put them down as a particular flower painting, but actually individually, and you look at the stroke and you look at the abundance or the define of the boundaries within those small little explosive things. And Hugh Lane had the wit to go and collect those women. And they were very mobile women. They moved between Europe and Ireland back and forth and had a network. When you see other, like Gwen John in the UK, who's Welsh, and then you find that the women in this collection have been friends or had obviously shared ideas or influenced each other.
Yeah, they would have met in Paris.
Yeah,
Paris was to go to.
Yeah, or
place. Yeah.
So so there's a lot of links, and I try to focus on the collection here also with the portraits and the emotional impact of particular portraits, not just general. Every now and again there's a few that have really, you can see that the painter and the sitter are tied with deeper bonds than just representation. And it's that thing of the object with its own voice speaking And that's what I look for in the collection. And those moments are there. Yeah.
And just wondering, looking at your sons and the fact you sort of, their heads, I mean, that might be more practical than you put some cats on their bald heads, you know, but you've left the hair off them, and there's almost a sort of, like a calm meditative thing, you know, you've got on the table and the sort of sitting, you know, posing cross-legged it in the sort of, you know, that pose, and then even there, they're sort of, they look quite meditative and, you know, quite still and calm. And, you know, I'd say, did he have a phone in his hand? He'd taken the phone out, but he may have been staring at the phone, and that's why he was able to stay still for so long. But, you know, I noticed that then with the Primate, you've added the hair, even with the horse, with the stallion, you have without the hair as well. And then in the Primate, by putting in that, you know, that embroidery and adding in the hair, it's lent us even more empathy or something for it. It just seems more like by adding that, it gives us sort of a sense of, you know, I feel more empathy for the man than I would possibly without the hair.
Yeah.
You know, was that purposeful, or did you just feel that you needed something to add to it because it didn't work without it?
Lots of complicated questions there. But I suppose the embroidery on the Primate is about love. So you do something, you know, people embroider with care, and, you know, there's hours and hours in that. Poor Janet, myself and her used to have arguments if I made her pull out a bit, because she'd spent hours and hours. It took her months to make it. So there's like this dedication to craft and technique and rendering over and over again that creates love in a piece of work. And with the lack of hair on the boys, when I initially with the younger versions, that was because technically it'd be dreadful to have done that with hair, because the pain of pulling it off, but also I was really startled by the difference in the head, shapes of the head, and I could see really clearly which line of the family that shape head came from. And I found that startling, and I kept that then in the second piece or the third as we've gone along, because the structure of the head doesn't change, it didn't change. So you have that ancestral echo down through the form of the head. But I also think that hairlessness is terrifying as well. It does give there's no hidden, it's straight up, and the loss of that time is it's unapologetic, it's gone. So that is in the cast as well. Yeah.
Right. Right, well, there's one more question, yeah?
Sure. Sorry, I tried to make it short. I was just wondering, you mentioned originally that your first works were weightless. You can start, and even in this one, second days on, just the weight of the sun on the table. You ended up wondering if the table is made of wood or plaster, because I feel like it would break through if it was just plaster. But as your works continue, I feel like weight comes back into picture, especially with the Primate, the throat hanging. It feels like if you were to pick it up or just slump, it feels very present. And so I was wondering, do you think there's a reason for that weight coming back in your work, or?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Weight, sculpture and weight is a really fraught thing all the time. But yeah, it's not suspended in the way I've always done. I don't know, maybe it's to do with more settled, or maybe, but they are all hollow. So maybe they have to have weight to capture the loss of the time. Yeah.
And as it evolves, then they become, a little bit more solid. Well, I know
the work has definitely got more solid.
Yeah. The sculpture, as we were saying earlier, is the most fascinating medium, and and sculptures, and things take so long to make. We were saying that before.
Yes.
To study sculpture now is not as popular as it might have been.
No, this is, I suppose, one of the things within art education is there isn't that time. Sculpture takes a long time to learn and to become proficient in order to be able to say, I don't need to do that, I don't have to do that, I'll do this. And also it just is a discipline that takes time to carry out. And if you've a 3-year compressed course, there isn't time to do that. So the type of sculpture that's evolving now is quite different to when, and maybe that's a good thing.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again, Daphne. The Daphne Wright Deep-Rooted Things is on sale in our bookshop, and it's a really, really good catalogue. And now I'd like you all to come up and have view Primate. So thank you again, Daphne.
Thanks, Barbara.